The smell reached them before the sight did, a strange, sweet warmth drifting across the campyard like a memory from another world. Behind the bamboo fences of the American internment camp in the Philippines, a group of Japanese women watched soldiers carry trays from the kitchen. The food glowed golden in the tropical sun, soft-edged squares that steamed when touched. "It's not even bread," one woman muttered, her voice thin from hunger but sharpened with pride. "Americans eat yellow mud." The others laughed faintly, but the sound carried no joy. Laughter was safer than wonder. The war had ended months ago, but inside the camp, time still felt suspended, an uneasy truce between humiliation and survival. These women had been nurses, clerks, teachers, wives of officers. Their nation had promised them honor. Instead, they were here, under guard, stripped of uniforms and identity, living among barbed wire and alien smells. Hunger was their only certainty. Yet today, there was something new on the menu, a strange square food the guards called cornbread. It was soft where rice should be firm, sweet where food should be plain, and worst of all, it was American. The oldest among them, a 40-year-old nurse named Nakamura, had seen hunger before. During the siege of Manila, she had boiled weeds to keep her patients alive. She remembered the sound of bones breaking in the famine winter, the endless talk of rice. Now, as she stood in line with her tin tray, she felt her stomach twist with a betrayal worse than hunger, curiosity. She watched a young U.S. cook, barely more than a boy, ladle syrup onto the bread. The syrup dripped like sunlight. "They think we are children," she whispered. The woman behind her, 22, a seamstress from Osaka, sighed softly. "Children at least get milk," she said. When the first slice hit her tray, Nakamura was startled by its lightness. It jiggled when she moved, like cake. The Americans served it with beans and something called coffee, which was more like burnt water. Around her, women poked the cornbread suspiciously, lifting it with chopsticks or fingers, as if testing a foreign creature. One of them tore it apart. It broke with a hiss of steam. The color was golden, like the morning sun on the Pacific. "Too bright," someone said. "It looks like deceit." In the mess tent, the sound of eating was cautious, deliberate. Teeth met dough, and the air filled with the muffled murmurs of surprise. Some spat it out, disgusted by the sweetness. Others chewed slowly, ashamed of how much they wanted more. The cornbread stuck to their tongues, soft and heavy, the taste of milk and sugar alien to mouths trained on austerity. For months, they had eaten boiled barley, gray fish, and bitter greens. Sweetness belonged to peace. It was the flavor of surrender. A young woman named Fumiko sat apart, cradling her peace like a relic. Before the war, she had baked rice cakes for her brother's school lunches. She had not seen him since Hiroshima. She took a bite, hesitant, then decisive. The bread dissolved instantly, leaving a trail of warmth that rose to her eyes. Tears, sudden and uninvited, blurred the edges of the world. "It tastes like home," she whispered, though she did not mean Japan. She meant the home that hunger had stolen, the feeling of safety, of sweetness without guilt. The Americans noticed their reactions with amusement. One sergeant chuckled, "Guess they never had cornbread before." He was right, but the remark felt like a bruise pressed too hard. To the women, this wasn't just bread, it was defeat served on a tray. It said, "We can feed you better than your empire ever did." And yet, behind the bitterness, something else began to stir. If the enemy could make food that soft, that generous, what else had they been wrong about? The next day, the camp smelled of corn again. By then, the jokes had softened. "It's not even bread," the women still said, but with less certainty. Hunger had a way of blurring the borders of pride. They began to line up early, pretending not to, glancing shyly toward the kitchen. Nakamura found herself studying the American cooks. They laughed easily, sweat glistening on their necks, their movements unhurried. They didn't look like conquerors. They looked like boys too young to have buried anyone. One afternoon, a corporal offered to show them how it was made. "Cornmeal, sugar, milk, eggs," he said, holding up each ingredient like a teacher in class. The women nodded stiffly, but something inside them loosened. Cornmeal, they had never seen it before, a yellow dust that smelled faintly of sun. When he mixed it, the batter turned the color of golden dusk. Nakamura leaned forward despite herself. She wanted to ask how long it took to bake, but pride held her tongue still. Later, back in the barracks, Fumiko whispered, "It's not bread." Nakamura looked at her, then down at her hands, stained faintly with corn dust from the morning's kitchen duty. "No," she said quietly. "It's something else." Neither spoke for a long time. The silence felt heavy, but not cruel. Outside, the evening guards called out roll, their voices mingling with the distant laughter from the American side of the fence. In that strange lull between war and peace, cornbread became a quiet obsession. They spoke of it in fragments, in the way prisoners spoke of freedom, never directly, always through something else. Some said it was too soft, too sweet, too forgiving. Others said it was the first thing in months that tasted alive. The women began saving crumbs, drying them under their beds, as if afraid the taste might disappear when the war memories did. Weeks passed. The fences no longer looked as high. The guards started trusting them with more chores, kitchen work, laundry, even the garden near the supply shed. Nakamura was assigned to clean pots. One morning, she caught her reflection in a pan's dull shine and realized her face no longer looked hollow. The air smelled faintly of butter. She thought, absurdly, that it smelled like forgiveness. But forgiveness, like sweetness, came at a cost. Each bite of that golden bread reminded them of what was lost, the homeland crumbling under ash, the emperor's voice announcing surrender, the rice fields gone to weeds. To eat well in captivity felt like betrayal. And yet, to refuse was to stay hungry forever. That evening, as dusk settled over the camp, Nakamura sat on her cot, a small piece of cornbread balanced on her knee. Around her, the women talked quietly, their words blurring into the rhythm of crickets outside. She broke the bread in half, offered a piece to Fumiko, and said, "Maybe this is what peace tastes like." Fumiko hesitated, then took it. For a moment, they both chewed in silence, the sweetness softening the bitterness lodged deep inside. Outside, the guards changed shifts, the sun dipped behind the palm trees, and the first stars blinked awake. Nakamura looked toward the horizon beyond the fence, where smoke from the kitchen rose into the fading sky like incense. The war was over, they said. But as she swallowed the last crumb, she realized something unsettling. This bread had changed the way defeat tasted. And that, she feared, was only the beginning. The first bite was cautious, half a taste, half an act of surrender. Nakamura felt the bread melt on her tongue, its warmth spreading through her mouth like a secret. It was soft where she expected dryness, sweet where she expected salt. For a moment, her body forgot where she was. The cornbread, golden and humble, carried a weight she hadn't prepared for. She looked down at the crumbs, then around the room. The other women had gone still too, caught in the same quiet confusion. Fumiko's eyes were wet again, though she smiled as if scolding herself for it. "It shouldn't taste good," she whispered. Nakamura nodded. "And yet it does." Outside, the camp buzzed with its usual rhythm, the clang of tin, the lazy barking of a dog, the endless hum of heat, but inside the mess tent, time slowed. The women chewed in near silence, trying to decide whether what they felt was comfort or shame. Hunger had taught them to eat without thought, but this sweetness demanded reflection. It reminded them of everything they had lost, homes filled with the smell of rice, laughter under paper lanterns, the comfort of routine. And here, of all places, that memory returned, not in Japan, but behind barbed wire, offered by the hands of strangers. In the days that followed, cornbread became a kind of ritual. It was served every few mornings, cut in uneven squares and piled beside beans or stew. The Americans called it home cooking, a phrase that carried warmth even when the food was lukewarm. For the women, it was something else entirely. To them, it was a quiet challenge. Could they taste sweetness without tasting defeat? Some refused to eat it, trading their portions for extra rice or canned fish. Others, like Fumiko, accepted it without words, eating with the reverence of prayer. Nakamura found herself studying the bread more than eating it. She would turn it in her hands, watching the way sunlight caught the grains of cornmeal, as if the loaf itself was made of captured light. She remembered the American boy who baked it, the one who hummed while stirring batter, unaware of how strange that sound felt in a place built for punishment. He was kind but careless with his kindness, not realizing it landed like salt in an open wound. The camp's Red Cross inspector visited that week. He walked the grounds with a clipboard, nodding approvingly at the gardens and kitchens. "Fair treatment," he said to the interpreter. "Better than most camps." The women overheard, and something in them twisted. Fair treatment, such an easy phrase, spoken by men who had never tasted hunger that humiliated. That night, Nakamura dreamed of her patients from the war, starved soldiers whose last breaths rattled like broken fans. She woke with the taste of sugar still on her tongue and hated herself for liking it. Cornbread became the camp's strange currency. It was traded for hairpins, thread, or small favors, soft gold in a world of scarcity. Fumiko once bartered 2 pieces for a pencil stub. She said she wanted to write a recipe, though no one had paper to spare. Still, she kept that pencil tucked in her sleeve like a talisman. "When I go home," she said, "I'll make this for my brother." Her voice wavered between hope and disbelief. The others said nothing. None of them knew whether home still existed. There were days the women laughed again, though always quietly, as if testing the sound. They joked about how Americans put sugar in everything: coffee, bread, even beans. "Maybe that's why they win wars," one woman teased. "They fight with sweetness." The others laughed, and the moment hung light in the air, absurd but needed. Humor was a bridge across the gulf of loss, fragile but real. As weeks passed, the Americans began offering cooking demonstrations for those assigned to kitchen duty. Nakamura watched from the doorway, pretending she wasn't interested. The corporal showed them how to whisk eggs, measure flour, mix cornmeal. His hands moved with practiced ease, his voice patient. She caught only fragments of his words: a pinch, a cup, just right. The women whispered translations among themselves, each trying to memorize the rhythm rather than the meaning. That evening, Nakamura found herself dreaming again, this time of her mother, who had died before the war. In the dream, her mother baked something warm, though Japan had no ovens, and the scent filled their small house. When Nakamura woke, the smell was still in her head. It took her a moment to realize it wasn't memory. It was the morning's cornbread cooling in the kitchen. She rose without thinking, walked to the window, and stared out at the Americans carrying trays to the mess tent. The sight stirred something she couldn't name, a thread of longing, maybe, or envy. They looked so free in their simplicity. Later, as they ate, a storm broke over the camp. Rain struck the tin roofs, loud as applause. The women sat huddled inside, their food growing cold, and for once, no one spoke. They listened instead: the thunder, the rain, the quiet rhythm of spoons against plates. The cornbread had soaked through, turning soft and heavy, but still they ate it. The sweetness had dulled, replaced by something gentler, almost like comfort. After the storm, the guards brought blankets. It was a small gesture, but the women received it with the wary gratitude of those who had learned not to trust mercy. That night, Nakamura shared her blanket with Fumiko. "Do you think they pity us?" the younger woman asked. "No," Nakamura said after a long pause. "I think they just don't know what else to do." The next morning, a rumor spread that some of the Americans were being transferred. The corporal who baked had packed his things. The kitchen would have new staff. When Nakamura heard, her chest tightened unexpectedly. She hadn't realized how much she'd watched him, not the man himself, but what he represented, a world that could still make something as unnecessary, as foolishly kind, as sweet bread in a place like this. Before he left, the corporal handed her a small paper folded twice. Inside was a recipe written in clumsy Japanese: corn, sugar, milk, heat, wait for gold. She didn't thank him. She couldn't. Instead, she tucked it into her sleeve beside Fumiko's pencil. That night, under the hum of crickets, she unfolded it again and traced the crooked letters with her finger. The ink had smudged, but the words still shone faintly in the lamplight. Outside, the camp slept. Inside, Nakamura sat awake, staring at the paper and the crumbs of her last piece of cornbread. It no longer tasted like defeat. It tasted like something far more dangerous, something that might one day be remembered as kindness. And in the ruins of war, kindness was the most disarming weapon of all. The kitchen became their classroom, though no one called it that. It began quietly, almost accidentally, when Nakamura was assigned to scrub pans after breakfast. The American cook, a wiry man with freckles and a habit of humming jazz tunes, was kneading dough at the counter. The air smelled of cornmeal and melted butter, and for a moment, the camp didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a place where life might still grow. He noticed her watching. "You ever bake?" he asked. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was gentle. When he handed her the spoon, she hesitated, then took it. The batter clung to the wood like gold dust. Soon others joined, Fumiko, Yuki, 2 nurses from Nagasaki. The Americans let them help with simple tasks: stirring, pouring, greasing tins. There was laughter, awkward gestures, and the strange intimacy of shared work. The corporal returned occasionally, translating fragments. "Mix slow. Not too much milk. Wait for bubbles." They followed his instructions with reverence, as if decoding a sacred ritual. The sound of mixing became hypnotic. The scrape of metal, the thud of spoons, the sigh of batter folding over itself. It was the sound of time moving forward again. The women learned to measure not in grams or go-cups, but in rhythm: 1 scoop, 2 heartbeats, a pause. They learned that patience was part of the recipe, that heat could be both punishment and blessing. Fumiko, the youngest, was quick to laugh when the batter spilled. "This is foolish," she would say, grinning through the steam. "We are soldiers of sugar." Nakamura would almost smile at that. She hadn't thought her mouth capable of smiling anymore. The irony wasn't lost on them. Only months before, these same hands had bandaged soldiers, written casualty reports, sewn flags for victory. Now they whisked eggs for the enemy. It should have been humiliating. Yet, somewhere between bitterness and butter, something softer began to bloom. Perhaps it was the quiet power of doing something small but whole again. Perhaps it was the simple truth that creation, even inside captivity, was a kind of rebellion. When word spread that Japanese women were baking in the American kitchen, some prisoners reacted with anger. "You make food for those who burned our cities?" An older woman spat. "You forget who you are?" Nakamura said nothing. She felt the accusation settle in her chest like a stone. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat under the weak light of a lantern, staring at her hands, cracked, flour-stained, guilty. Each scar seemed to whisper its own history: wounds stitched, bodies buried, rice fields gone. She wondered if kindness, like sugar, could rot something if it stayed too long. The next morning, she almost didn't go back. But when she passed the kitchen door, she saw Fumiko already inside, laughing with the American cook as she stirred the batter too fast. The sight tugged at her. The girl's laughter was light, unscarred by memory. For the first time, Nakamura envied youth, not its beauty, but its ability to forgive. She stepped inside, picked up the bowl, and began to stir. By mid-June, the kitchen had become their refuge. The Americans brought in old recipe books, worn, stained, pages falling apart. The women couldn't read most of it, but they copied the shapes of the letters carefully onto scraps of newspaper. Fumiko traced them with her pencil stub, whispering the strange words as if they were charms. Butter, sugar, rise. Each syllable was foreign but hopeful, like learning to breathe differently. One afternoon, the corporal showed them how to make cornbread from scratch. The oven, a dented iron box, creaked like a tired soldier. The heat filled the room until everyone was sweating, faces flushed, laughter echoing off the walls. The smell, rich, golden, impossible to ignore, spilled through the open windows and into the yard. Even the guards paused to inhale. When the bread emerged, perfectly browned, the women clapped softly, as if applauding a miracle. They ate together, sitting on overturned crates, the taste almost holy. No one spoke of war or home or shame. They just chewed, slowly, reverently. For a few minutes, there were no victors or prisoners, only people sharing something warm between them. Nakamura thought of her patients again, the ones who had died without comfort, and felt tears threaten. She turned away, pretending to cough. That night, she wrote down everything she remembered about the recipe, her handwriting trembling. Corn, sugar, milk, heat, wait for gold. She added one more line: Stir with forgiveness. She didn't know why she wrote it. Maybe because it sounded like a prayer. But forgiveness, like fire, was never one-sided. Weeks later, one of the Americans left a letter on the kitchen counter. It was written in simple, broken Japanese. "Your bread better than mine. Thank you." The message was signed only with initials. Nakamura read it aloud to the others, her voice catching. The room went silent. Yuki covered her face. Fumiko whispered, "Maybe they regret too." That evening, a new shipment of prisoners arrived, Japanese soldiers, gaunt and hollow-eyed. When they were brought to the mess tent, the women saw them recoil at the sight of American food, refusing to eat. Nakamura understood that disgust too well. She broke her cornbread in half and walked toward one of them. The man glared, hatred raw in his face. "Eat," she said quietly. He hesitated, then took it. The silence that followed felt like a battlefield where no one fired. Later, she returned to the kitchen and found Fumiko sitting by the stove, holding the corporal's letter. "Do you think they mean it?" she asked. Nakamura looked at the glowing oven, the faint crackle of embers. "Regret," she said. "Maybe. But regret is not enough." Fumiko nodded, then smiled faintly. "Then we will teach them how to mean it, with butter." Laughter broke the heaviness, small but defiant. For the first time, it didn't sound out of place. By summer's end, the women had filled a small notebook with recipes, borrowed, adapted, invented. It wasn't much: cornbread, biscuits, something called pancakes. Yet each page carried fingerprints, smudges, crumbs, a record of survival written in grease and memory. They called it the Book of Remorse, half-jokingly. To them, each recipe was an apology no one had asked for, yet somehow necessary. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the kitchen glowed with amber light, Nakamura stood by the window, the book pressed to her chest. The camp beyond the fence looked softer in the haze, less like a cage and more like a border between past and future. Fumiko joined her, her face flushed from baking. "When we go home," she said, "I'll make this again. Maybe they'll laugh." Nakamura turned the book over in her hands, feeling its weight. "They might," she said. "But maybe they'll also understand." Outside, the ovens cooled. The smell of corn lingered in the humid air, mixing with the scent of rust and sea salt. For the first time, the camp felt almost peaceful. But as the women cleaned the counters and the soldiers locked the gates for the night, a distant echo of gunfire rolled from beyond the hills, a reminder that the world beyond their fragile kitchen had not yet learned their recipe for peace. 10 years had passed since the gates opened, and the women walked out beneath a foreign sun, free but uncertain of what freedom now meant. Nakamura had returned to Tokyo, a city unrecognizable beneath its new American skyline. Neon lights hummed where wooden houses once stood. The smell of diesel and roasted corn filled the air where incense and soy once ruled. She rented a narrow room above a tea shop and worked in a hospital, her white uniform crisp but her heart still heavy with the memory of wire fences and warm bread. She told no one about the camp. When patients asked where she had lived during the war, she said simply, "Far away." The truth was too tangled, too sweet and shameful all at once. Yet sometimes, late at night, she caught herself craving that same golden taste she once resented. She would stare at her hands, remembering how the batter clung to her fingers, how the oven's heat had felt like both punishment and forgiveness. Fumiko found her first. She was married now, with a small child who toddled beside her like sunlight incarnate. "Sensei," she said with a smile, though Nakamura had never been her teacher. In her hands, she carried a paper bag from the new American market downtown. Inside were yellow grains, cornmeal. "I found it," Fumiko said softly. "Just like in the camp." Nakamura turned the bag over, watching the dust shimmer through the paper. It was absurd, she thought, that something so small could awaken ghosts. Yet when Fumiko asked if she remembered the recipe, she nodded before she could stop herself. That evening, they baked together in Nakamura's cramped kitchen. The room filled with the same scent she thought she'd left behind, warm, sweet, faintly foreign. The child clapped when the bread rose. For a moment, it was as if time folded in on itself. The camp kitchen, the laughter, the hesitant forgiveness, all returning in the glow of the gas oven. When they ate, silence settled between them. Fumiko broke the stillness first. "Do you think we were wrong?" she asked. Nakamura looked up. "For what?" "For learning from them. For liking what they gave us." The words trembled. "Sometimes I dream of the camp, and I wake up smiling. Then I feel guilty." Nakamura thought of the corporal's letter, still tucked between the pages of an old medical textbook. "Your bread better than mine." She had kept it not as sentiment, but as evidence, proof that kindness could exist even in captivity. Yet now, hearing Fumiko's voice, she realized that guilt had followed them home like a shadow that refused to fade. "Maybe," she said slowly, "we weren't wrong. Maybe we were just hungry for something more than food." The years rolled forward. American culture seeped into every corner of Japan. Hollywood films, chewing gum, jazz music, wheat and corn in every kitchen. Relief programs flooded the country with sacks marked "Gift of the United States." Housewives learned new recipes from pamphlets printed in both languages. Biscuits, muffins, cornbread. The same taste that had once symbolized defeat now became part of the nation's rebuilding. Children in schools ate cornmeal porridge, unaware that it was once the meal of prisoners. Nakamura watched it all with quiet astonishment. She would see young women in Western dresses carrying loaves wrapped in paper and feel a strange mix of pride and sorrow. History, she realized, had a cruel sense of irony. The food that had humbled them now sustained them. But for her, cornbread would never be innocent again. Each bite carried whispers of the camp, the sweat on the Americans' faces, Fumiko's laughter, the sting of shame that came with sweetness. One winter evening, she was invited to speak at a hospital gathering honoring war nurses. She stood at the podium, her hair streaked with gray, her voice steady. She spoke of duty, loss, and endurance, but not of captivity. Yet afterward, a young nurse approached her, saying she had heard rumors that Nakamura had once been held by Americans. "Is it true?" the girl asked. "Were they cruel?" Nakamura hesitated. The truth flickered behind her eyes like the glow of an oven door. "Sometimes," she said softly. "But not always." The girl looked puzzled, as though cruelty and kindness could not coexist. Nakamura only smiled. That night, she dreamed of the camp again. She saw herself baking, the women's laughter echoing like wind chimes through the humid air. Then the dream shifted. She was outside the wire fence, watching her younger self knead dough. The younger woman looked up, eyes hollow yet hopeful, and whispered, "Don't forget." When Nakamura woke, tears had already soaked her pillow. Years later, in the late 1950s, she received a letter from America. It was from the corporal, older now, retired, his English still clumsy but heartfelt. He wrote that he had never forgotten the women who made better bread than me, and that he hoped peace had been kind to them. Enclosed was a photograph, a small bakery in Kansas with a sign reading "Golden Loaf." Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, he had added, "For friends who taught me forgiveness." Nakamura held the letter for a long time, her chest tightening around an ache she hadn't known she still carried. The next Sunday, she invited Fumiko and her son for lunch. They baked again, this time not in silence, but with stories and laughter. As the boy helped stir the batter, his small fingers dusted with cornmeal, Nakamura watched him with a quiet wonder. Generations, she thought, could inherit peace the way they once inherited grief. When the bread came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, she cut it carefully and handed the first piece to the child. He took a bite, eyes wide. "It's sweet," he said. "It tastes like sunshine." She smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what it tastes like." After they left, she sat alone at the table, the last slice cooling beside her. Outside, the city buzzed with life, vendors shouting, trains roaring, children laughing. Yet beneath it all lingered the echo of another world. The clang of tin trays, the hum of American songs, the voices of women who had learned to measure mercy in spoonfuls. She reached for the final piece, breaking it slowly, feeling its warmth against her palms. The ghosts of the past no longer frightened her. They were quieter now, gentler, like the fading scent of smoke after rain. They didn't ask for atonement, only remembrance. She took a bite, savoring the sweetness that once symbolized surrender and now, somehow, survival. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of corn from a nearby bakery. The city lights flickered against the night like small, enduring stars. Nakamura closed her eyes, let the taste linger, and thought of all the hands, Japanese and American, that had shaped this bread, this fragile piece. The world, she realized, did not heal in speeches or treaties. It healed in kitchens, in small acts of warmth shared across walls once built for war. And as she swallowed the last crumb, she understood, the bread had never belonged to one side or the other. It belonged to whoever had learned, at last, to feed instead of fight. Which city are you watching our video from? We'd love to hear. Drop your city in the comments below. And please subscribe to the channel for more Wild West tales. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family.